All right, so today we're diving into the world of Aussie finance with Global Prime. And no, before you ask, they're not sailing container ships around the world. We're talking about something way more interesting, financial derivatives.
They're like giving you a backstage pass to the global stock exchange, but from your laptop. We're talking foreign exchange, commodities, gold, even cryptocurrencies.
It's like we're stepping into a financial thriller here, except instead of that briefcase full of cash, we've got this stack of documents, corporate applications, financial service terms, hedging policies. I mean, where do we even start with all this?
Well, a good place to start is always the financial services guide.
Hmm.
It's like the rule book for Global Prime. Lays out exactly what they can and cannot do.
So no shady business going on.
They can walk you through the basics of trading, even execute trades for you. But don't expect them to give you personalized financial advice. That's not really their thing.
So they're not managing your retirement fund, more like handing you the tools to maybe make or lose a fortune really fast. And speaking of tools, what about these global prime products I keep seeing everywhere in this document? What are those all about?
Think of them like high-stakes bets. But instead of betting on horses, you're betting on the price movements of things like gold, currencies, even Bitcoin. Global Prime offers something called contracts for difference, or CFDs.
CFDs.
Yeah, so imagine, for example, you have a hunch the Aussie dollar is about to go up against the US dollar.
Okay, I'm following. Let's say I think the Aussie dollar is going to surge. Then what?
With a CFD, you're basically making a bet on that hunch. You don't actually own the asset, in this case, the Aussie dollar. But you are speculating on its price movements. So if you're right, if the Aussie dollar climbs higher, you make a profit. That profit's based on the difference between the opening and closing price of the CFD contract.
And if I'm wrong, if the Aussie dollar takes a dive instead?
Then you would lose money, calculated the same way, based on, how far the price moved against what you predicted. And here's where it gets interesting. With CFDs, you often trade on margin.
Margin. Sounds risky. What does that mean?
Margin means you only put down a fraction of the total contract value as a deposit. So it's like you have a much bigger bet on the table, potentially bigger wins, but also, potentially bigger losses too.
Okay, big wins, big losses. That's where the high stakes part comes in.
Exactly. And that's precisely why Global Prime keeps stressing how important it is to understand leverage, which is key concept connected to margin trading.
Leverage. Is that something we need to get into?
We can definitely delve into that a bit more if you'd like.
Definitely. I think our listeners need to understand leverage, how it affects trades, especially in a fast market like we have today. But before we get lost in all the details of leverage, let's maybe switch gears a moment. Something else in these documents caught my eye. Global Prime's hedging counterparty policy.
Good catch. Yeah, that document gives us a peek into how Global Prime manages its own risk.
So while we're placing our bets, Global Prime is making sure they're covered if the market takes a swing.
Exactly. They have a whole network of other, heavy hitters in the financial world. These other companies act as counterparties to Global Prime's trades.
Counterparties.
Yeah, think of it like a safety net for a high wire act. They work with some names you might recognize, CMC Markets, Invast Financial Services. It's all about spreading out the risk, making sure they can meet their financial obligations.
Obligations to who?
To you, the client.
So it's like they're saying, we're good at what we do, we know how to manage risk, but we're not taking any chances.
Precisely. They're showing they're responsible, stable, which is super important in finance, right? But, it's important to remember, and Global Prime makes this very clear. Trading always has risks. No matter what, no matter how many precautions are taken, losses can occur.
You could still lose everything.
Losses could even be more than your initial investment.
So no matter how good you are, there's always that element of chance. It's not foolproof.
Exactly. There can always be unforeseen circumstances, things nobody sees coming, things that can really throw a wrench in even the most carefully thought out plans.
Okay, so those hedging strategies are good, but they don't make it risk-free. Which brings up another important point. My money. How do I know it's safe? These financial product service terms get into that.
They do, yeah. It's a lot to get through. But the document does outline how Global Prime protects client funds.
Yeah.
One key takeaway is they have this thing called the Global Prime Trust Account.
Global Prime Trust Account?
Yeah, like a high security vault just for holding client money.
Makes sense.
Australian law actually requires them to keep client money separate from Global Prime's own operating funds.
So they're not using my money for their morning coffee run.
Not unless you're also buying a latte.
Good to know.
That money is completely separate. It's completely protected.
That's reassuring. But with all this talk of money flying around the world, how do I know my information is safe? Are we talking Fort Knox levels of security for my data too?
Global Prime has a whole privacy policy just for that. They take data security very seriously. The policy outlines how they collect, store, and use your personal information.
Okay, so they're not just giving it to anybody who asks.
And they can't, not legally. They've got Australia's privacy laws to answer to, and those are really strict.
That's good to know. In this day and age, you can never be too careful about data privacy. Okay, so we talked about these global prime products, those CFDs. Before we go any further, I think it's important for everyone to really understand how CFDs work.
Absolutely. Understanding how CFDs work is essential, especially if you're thinking about leverage trading.
Because while those gains sound great, those risks...
Yeah, you really need to understand those.
Okay, so let's break it down a little. Let's say I'm feeling good about gold. I think the price is going to climb. How would a CFD work in that case?
Okay, so with gold,
Let's pause right there for a moment. We'll unpack those CFDs, use gold as our example when we come back after a quick break. Stay with us.
okay, so we're back, and we're going to crack the code on these CFDs using, what else? Gold. So let's say I'm feeling good about gold. I think the price is going up. How would a CFD work there?
Well, with the CFD, instead of buying like actual gold bars or coins, you're making a bet with Global Prime
A bet on.
on whether the price of gold is going to go up or down.
So I'm basically saying, hey, Global Prime, I'm feeling lucky. I think gold is going up. Let's make a deal, basically. And they're the ones providing the platform for that bet. So if you're right and the price of gold goes up, you'll make a profit based on the difference between the opening and the closing price of your CFD contract.
Okay, but what if I'm wrong? What if gold tanks?
Then you would lose money.
How much?
Calculated the same way based on how much it went down against your bet. And here's where it gets interesting. Remember we were talking about margin?
Yeah, like putting down just a fraction of the total trade.
Right. Margin trading lets you control a bigger chunk of an asset, gold, in this case, with only a little bit of your own money up front.
Give me an example.
So say you want to speculate on, let's say, $10,000 worth of gold,
All right.
but you only have $1,000. With a 10% margin requirement, you could control that whole $10,000 position.
So I could be making or losing money as if I had 10 grand worth of gold, even though I only invested one.
That's leverage for you. It can mean big profits, but, and this is important, it can also mean big losses. Remember all those warnings Global Prime puts in their documents? Losses can be bigger than your initial investment. And that's especially important with volatile assets like crypto. Global Prime offers CFDs for crypto too, by the way.
So it's a lot of power.
Yeah, leverage is powerful.
Big potential rewards, but if things go south...
Big potential for things to go very wrong.
Exactly. That's why we're spending so much time on this. It's super important to understand how leverage works and to use it responsibly. So basically, don't bet the farm.
Unless you're ready to lose the farm, yeah.
Right. Okay, so before I go betting on gold or anything else, I need to do my homework. I need to really understand those risks and never invest more than I can afford to lose, right?
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Now, let's switch back to Global Prime for a moment. Another thing to think about is the security of your funds. We touched on their Global Prime Trust account. And while that's great, required by Australian law, it's not a 100% guarantee against all risks.
Wait, what does that mean?
So while Global Prime seems like a very reputable company, regulated by ASIC, you should always consider all possibilities.
Like what?
Unforeseen events. I mean, we can't predict the future. Extreme market volatility.
A market crash.
Yeah. Or, worst case scenario, what if a counterparty collapses? Those things could theoretically impact even a segregated account.
So there's always some risk.
There's always some risk, exactly.
Okay, so I need to understand that before I even think about trading.
Absolutely. And you know what helps with risk? Diversification.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Isn't that how the saying goes?
Exactly. You spread your investments around, and it helps lower the risk if something happens to one of them.
Because if one investment goes bad, the others can kind of soften the blow.
Exactly. So you're not putting all your hopes on, say, just gold.
Smart.
Now, let's move on to something else that's very important, especially these days, and that's data privacy. Global Prime has a whole privacy policy, And it's very detailed. It lays out everything about how they handle your information.
Which is important. With all the data breaches and scams these days, it makes you think twice. I will say, though, it's good to see that they're not selling their clients' data.
They're not, and they can't. They have to follow Australian law. And those privacy laws, they're no joke. They take data very seriously down under.
So they're not going to be spamming my inbox or making a quick buck by selling my info?
Not if they want to stay in business, no.
Good to know. So they might use it for, like, verification and stuff.
Verification, regulatory requirement.
But it's all in their policy.
It's all right there, totally
Oh,
transparent.
that's good. Transparency is key. Okay, so let's shift gears here for a moment and look at Global Prime itself. They have this corporate application document. What is this all about?
It basically gives us a look inside the company, their structure, registration details, information about authorized personnel.
So who are these people running Global Prime?
Exactly. It tells you all the important players. The directors, the shareholders, who's making the decisions, setting the policies, that kind of thing.
It's good to know there are actual people behind all this, right?
Absolutely. These aren't just faceless corporations. There are individuals responsible for every decision, every trade.
Right, right. Speaking of decisions, you mentioned something earlier that I wanted to circle back to. Global Prime's profit-sharing arrangement.
Oh, right, with their parent company, FMGP Trading Group Pletty Ltd.
Yeah, it's in their financial services guide. And it just caught my eye. What's the deal with that?
So the document doesn't go into all the nitty-gritty details, but basically, it sounds like Global Prime has certain revenue goals they need to meet. And if they hit those targets, some of that money flows back to the parent company.
So how well Global Prime does directly affects the parent company's bottom line.
It seems that way, yeah.
Okay, so is that, like, normal? Should we
That-
be concerned?
It's not unusual in finance, but it does show how connected everything is. Like what affects one company can have a ripple effect on others connected to it.
It's like a whole financial ecosystem. But the financial services guide does say that as a client, I have the right to ask for more information about this arrangement, right?
They do mention that, yeah.
So that's good. I like transparency.
Exactly. And it shows that Global Prime is committed to being open with their clients.
Yeah.
If you're going to trust a company with your money, it makes sense to want to know everything about how they operate, right?
Absolutely. I mean, they're regulated, but it never hurts to be extra careful.
Exactly. Transparency builds trust, which is essential in the financial world. And speaking of trust and safety, let's get back to Global Prime's hedging counterparty policy. Remember, we were talking about this earlier.
Yeah, it's like their safety net, right? How they protect themselves and us if the market takes a turn.
Exactly. And one of the key takeaways here is diversification.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. They're spreading out their risk by partnering with multiple counterparties for their trades.
And who are these counterparties again?
Right. So they specifically mention working with CMC Markets, Invast Financial Services, IS Prime Limited, and Prime Trading Services, PLEA Ltd.
Okay, so some big names in the financial world. They're not messing around.
Exactly. They're partnering with well-established companies to minimize their risk.
So if something happens to one counterparty,
They're not solely reliant on that one.
it's like having a backup plan for your backup plan.
Precisely. But we should remember that ultimately, the one responsible for managing risk is you, the trader.
Right. So even though Global Prime has all these safety nets in place, I still need to be smart about my own trades.
Exactly. They provide the platform, the tools, all the information, but at the end of the day, the decisions about your investments, your risk tolerance, that's all on you.
Okay, so don't go blaming Global Prime if I make a risky trade and it goes bad.
Exactly. Understand the risks. Make informed decisions.
Got it. Trade responsibly. Okay, before we wrap this up, I want to touch on one more document, this trust application. It seems like Global Prime also offers trading accounts for trusts. Trust accounts for trading. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, they have options for people who manage money through a trust.
So you're telling me if I've got a trust and I want to get in on the trading action, Global Prime can hook me up.
They can. This document, the trust application, it basically lays out everything you need to know if you're thinking about opening that kind of account.
What kind of stuff does it cover?
All the requirements, the steps you need to take, what kinds of trusts they'll work with, and all the paperwork they need to, verify everything.
So they're dotting their I's and crossing their T's.
Exactly.
Okay, so they've got options for trust. They seem to really know their stuff. It's all starting to sound pretty good. But, every coin has two sides. What about the downsides? Are there any red flags we should be aware of with Global Prime?
That's a great question. It's important to think about that. I mean, Global Prime has a lot to offer, but it's true. They're not perfect. No financial institution is.
So no sugarcoating. What are some of the downsides? What might make someone think twice about Global Prime?
Well, something to keep in mind is that Global Prime, they mostly provide general advice and their execution only. We talked about that before.
Right, so they're not giving out personalized financial advice.
Right. And they're not tailoring investment strategies to your specific needs or anything like that.
So if someone's looking for someone to hold their hand and tell them exactly what to invest in, Global Prime is not the right place.
Right. Global Prime's strength is giving you access to the markets, the tools for trading, but the actual decisions, that's all on you.
It's more DIY investing.
Exactly. And then there's the potential for conflicts of interest, like with their profit-sharing agreement with their parent company.
We talked about that earlier. They're regulated, sure, but I guess it's still something to be aware of.
Definitely. Global Prime is upfront about it, but you always want to know how a company makes money and if there are any practices that could put clients at a disadvantage.
So do your research. Be an informed investor.
Exactly. And let's not forget the biggest thing. Trading always has risks. You can be the best broker in the world, have the best platform, all the safeguards in place.
You could still lose money.
Exactly. Global Prime's documents, they make that very clear.
Like with those warnings about how you can lose more than you invest.
Right. Especially with those leveraged products, CFDs.
So it's not a get-rich-quick scheme.
Not at all.
Sure.
You need knowledge, skill, a good strategy.
And you need to be okay with the fact that you might not win every time.
Exactly. Trading is a long game.
So we've talked about some risks. What else? What else should people be aware of with Global Prime?
One thing that comes to mind, especially for newer investors, is that Global Prime's platform, it's pretty complex. And they have a lot of products, a lot of options, CFDs on currencies, commodities, indices, crypto.
It's a lot to take in.
It can be overwhelming. They do offer some support, but there's definitely a learning curve there.
So don't just jump in head first.
Exactly. Learn the platform, learn the products, do your research first.
Makes sense. And what about like technical stuff? Their system seems really advanced, but things happen, right?
Right. Global Prime's platform is very reliable, but no system is perfect. There can be glitches, outages.
Things break, even the best technology.
Exactly. Global Prime has a great track record, but you should always be prepared, especially if you need to make a trade quickly.
So have a backup plan, just in case.
Always have plan B.
Okay, good advice. So we've talked about potential risks, the platform. What about costs? Are there any fees with Global Prime?
Oh yeah, like any brokerage, Global Prime has fees. They have spreads, commissions. You might have to pay for overnight financing.
I guess those fees can add up.
They can. You need to factor those into your strategy. Or you might be surprised.
Another thing to keep in mind, so let me get this straight. Potential downsides. There's no personalized financial advice. There's the possibility of conflicts of interest. You've got the risks that come with any kind of trading. The platform's a bit complex. There's always a chance for technical hiccups. And of course, there are fees involved. Did I miss anything?
I think you covered it all. You've done your homework.
Well, I learned from the best.
Global Prime can be a great option for people who are interested in trading. But it's like anything else. You need to be informed. Look at all sides of it.
Exactly. Know what you're getting into, what the risks are.
And most important, decide if it's right for you and your financial goals.
Okay, before we call it a day, let's go back to something else. We were looking at those division events. Global Prime mentions in their terms. What a name, right? Sounds pretty intense.
It does, and they are, potentially.
Okay, so what are they, in plain English?
So basically, a division event is anything major that could really shake things up, affect the value of an asset, big regulatory changes, new technologies that come along.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, let's say there's a huge breakthrough in blockchain technology. That could change everything for cryptocurrency, right? That could be a division event.
Okay, so things that could really rock the boat.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, this is where it gets interesting. Global Prime can actually make adjustments to your trades, your stop-loss orders, even your contracts if one of these division events happens.
Wait a minute. They can change the rules of the game while I'm playing.
Kind of, yeah. They say these changes are necessary, to manage their risk and to protect their clients' interests when something big happens. But they have the final say.
So even if I disagree, they can just make the change.
That's the thing. They can. And that's why it's so important to read those terms and conditions, to understand what you're signing up for.
It definitely makes you think twice. So it's not enough to just be aware of division events. I need to understand how Global Prime might respond to them and how that might affect me.
Exactly. They're all about transparency. But it's something to keep in mind.
The market is unpredictable. You never know what's going to happen.
Exactly. And that's why it's important to know how to protect yourself.
Okay, so how do I do that? How can I mitigate some of these risks? I need some practical tips.
All right, first things first, read those financial product service terms, especially the section about division events. Don't skim it. Understand it. And don't be afraid to ask questions.
So if something's unclear, I should just call Global Prime and ask for clarification.
Absolutely. They're there to help. Second, and we've said this before, diversify. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right. So if I'm worried about, say, a division event with crypto, I should also invest in something else, like maybe gold or forex.
Exactly. That way you're not exposed to just one thing. And here's a simple but important one. Stay informed. Pay attention to what's happening in the market. Any news, any trends that could trigger a division event.
So I can't just bury my head in the sand.
You know, knowledge is power. And if you can see these events coming, you can adapt your strategy.
Okay, so I need to stay informed, I need to diversify, and what else? Anything else I can do to manage my risk?
Learn how to use those risk management tools. Stop loss orders, for example, those can really help.
Remind me how those work again.
Basically, a stop loss order automatically closes out your trade if it hits a certain loss limit you set.
So if things start to go south, my losses are limited.
Exactly. It's a safety net. But remember, it's not perfect. If the market moves too quickly, it might not execute in time.
Okay, so a stop loss can help, but it's not foolproof. Anything else?
Just remember that golden rule, the one we always talk about. Never trade with money that you can't afford to lose.
Right, because even with the best strategies, things can still go wrong.
Exactly. Trading is something you do for the long term. It's not a quick way to get rich.
Words to live by. So basically, do your homework, understand the risks, and never invest more than you can afford to lose.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, there you have it, folks. Our deep dive into Global Prime. We've looked at their services, how they manage risk, how they handle your data.
We even got a glimpse into the company itself.
We talked about those trading agreements, those division events, everything. Hopefully now you know enough to decide if Global Prime is the right fit for you.
And if you want to learn more, just grab their documents and take a look for yourself.
Exactly. Do your own research. Understand the risks. Make informed decisions. And remember, knowledge is power. That's true in the financial world, and it's true in life. That's all the time we have.